Juliet, what's my afternoon looking like? Dr. Pamela Winter had come back from lunch, and by the parking lot, she could tell it was going to be a busy afternoon. Well, Doc, Mr. Guthrie's in room 1, Miss Carroll's in room 2, and your special client is in room 3. Pamela stopped, looking at Juliet with confusion. I thought I only had 4 clients this afternoon. Julia Masters is coming in to forget about something or another, and Robert Townsend was... Yes, ma'am, they're still coming in, but all 3 of these clients just showed up while you were at lunch and said they needed to see you immediately. Mr. Guthrie said it was a blue feeling. Does that make any sense? Dr. Winter felt her nostrils flaring as she headed for room 1. This was becoming a problem that she would have to work out or risk much. When Mrs. Masters arrives, please put her in room 4 and tell her that I'm immensely sorry, and I will half the cost of today's visit. Until I finish with these clients, hold my other clients. Yes, ma'am, said Julia dutifully. Pamela smiled, thanking her receptionist, and heading off to deal with these 3 sudden arrivals. Juliet truly was the perfect woman for the job. Mr. Guthrie was lying on the couch when she arrived, his purple cowboy boots propped up on the arm as a look of immense dread stretched across his face. Dr. Winter went to make some tea as he lay there looking lost, and as it brewed on the hot plate, she sat down and tried to find a smile for him. Mr. Guthrie, to what do I owe the honor of having such a celebrity on my couch? He didn't look like a celebrity today. His normally pristine white hair was wrinkled, and the first 3 buttons were undone and showing a lot of straw-colored chest hair. His jeans had mud on them, like he might have fallen in a puddle, and his cowboy hat was gone. Even his loud purple boots looked muted today, and when he turned to look at her, she heard the voice of an angel calling out for help. Something's wrong, Doc. Something's bad wrong. I don't know what to do. I'm having these thoughts, and they're all bringing me down. Well, let's start with these thoughts. What's got you down, Charlie? Well, I was taking my gal downtown. We just eaten at Chester's. I was just thinking about a song I was going to write for the fall show, and all of a sudden I thought about a place I'd never been before. I was singing on a stage, and people were screaming. The lights were hot, and the music was loud, but it was good. I got done and climbed into a big fancy car, driving in some place I've never heard of. People kept talking to me, calling me something I don't rightly remember, but it wasn't right. I know my name, but they weren't using my name. I got all confused and fell down, and the next thing I know, I was sitting on this couch and waiting for you. Dr. Winter was nodding and pretending to write, but she already knew what would have to happen. He looked startled when she slid the cup of tea into his hand, but he took it and looked into the depths of the murk with his sad, sorrowful eyes. Charlie, you know who you are. You're Charlie Guthrie, the biggest celebrity in Kashmir. You're our songbird, our mountain lark, and we know your fall concert will be just spectacular, she said. And when he looked up at her, she couldn't help but smile. He kept looking into his tea, mesmerized by the dance of light. Are you sure? He whispered, the ripples sliding out as his hand shook a little. I am. Now drink your tea and get back to that song. Miss Maggie and I can't wait to hear it. Charlie Guthrie drained his glass in one long drink, but when he brought it down, he gagged a little as something thick and slimy plopped into the cup. Pamela spirited it away to the cupboard before he could come around, and when he shook his shaggy head and looked around, she was back in place and smiling. He looked as lost as he had the first time when he had stumbled from his home so many years ago. He couldn't have known the forces that looked for him, couldn't have known the people who still looked for him. But Charlie Guthrie, once the sound of a generation, was as much a part of her menagerie as the precious moments figures that Maggie loved to collect so much. Where am I? Doc, am I all right? You're just fine, Winter said. You had a momentary fugue, but you're okay now." He smiled, showing her a mouth of perfect white teeth, before thanking her and telling her to "just bill my insurance. Thank you, honey." He hummed a little as he left the office, something she knew but wouldn't comment on, and she listened to his boots clip-clop down the hall. Then she grabbed her teapot and headed for room 2. Angela Frosty was pacing the room when she came in, looking worse than she had ever seen her. Her hair was ragged from being pulled through her hands that were now clenched by her stomach, as if expecting to find something there. As Dr. Winter came in, the woman lunged at her before Pamela could ready herself for the clenching hands that came up to grab her. "My baby," she said, somewhere between a scream and a whisper. "Angela, your baby is—" But Angela cut her off. My baby, where is my baby? I want my baby, where is my baby?" Pamela Winter set her kettle down, composing herself before she put more than her hands on the fraying woman. It wasn't like this was the first time she had calmed Angela Frosty down before she shook herself to pieces. "Angela, sit with me and have a cup of tea. Your baby's fine. You are fine. And if you'll sit for a moment and calm yourself, you'll see that this is all just nerves." Angela's eyes darted around like a trapped animal, unsure of who to believe, but wanting to believe that what the woman was saying was true. Is it really okay?" she said, letting herself be led over to the couch. Pamela sat across from her, letting her fingers clutch at the side of her pantsuit top. Angela was such a strange thing, but Pamela was fond of her. This was how they had met, actually. Angela wanted to forget the death of her baby, a death that had driven her right over the edge. Her husband had been unable to help her, been unable to do much but tell her to get over it, and she had taken to wandering the streets and looking for her lost lamb. That was when Pamela had found her, shouting and walking, and took her somewhere she could get her some help. Turned out, that place had been Kashmir. "Angela, listen to me," she said, taking her hands as she stopped them from crumpling her top. "Your child is fine. Otto's in school, and Marcus is probably worried sick about you. Did you tell him you were coming here?" Angela's face had gone slack as Dr. Winter spoke to her, her words washing over the poor woman like a warm bath. The mania leaked right out of her, and when Winter offered her tea, she nodded rubberly and told her that would be lovely. Pamela smiled, taking up the cup from the nearby table and pouring it full. "Now, once you finish this, everything will be okay. You'll go back to what you were doing, and you won't give this a second thought." Angela nodded, but as the lump rose in her throat, Dr. Winter saw her gulp it back down and sigh contentedly. Pamela shook her head. Someday, she would either have to bring up her trauma or come to terms with the death of her first son. Someday, but not today. Angela looked at Winter placidly, as if just noticing her. "Oh, hello, Pamela. What are you doing in my living room?" Dr. Winter smiled, understanding that her friend was back to her usual oblivious self. "You're in my office, Angie. You said you weren't feeling well, and you came in for a little rest." "I did?" Angela said, dubiously, looking far away as if trying to piece it all together. Yes, of course I did. It must have been the heat. Thank you for letting me sit for a minute, Pam. Will you and Maggie be joining us for dinner this week? Otto's working on his rocket, and I know he'd love to see his favorite auntie." "Perhaps another time," Dr. Winter said. "But it was nice to see you again, Angela. Stop by any time you feel like you need a little rest." Angela thanked her again, wobbling a little as she rose. Pamela offered her a hand, and the woman talked about her son and her husband and how they were looking forward to the upcoming fall celebration. They say that Charlie Guthrie's working on a new song for the event. I like him. He reminds me of someone my mom used to listen to. What was his name? She said, more to herself than to Dr. Winter. Who can say? Winter said with a smile. Hopefully we can sit together like last year. Till then, Pam, Angela said, waving over her shoulder. She left then, but Winter couldn't help but see her touch her stomach as she rounded the corner. She sighed. A week, a day, 1,000 years, it didn't matter. Angela would be back, and Winter would have to put her back together again. She was heading for room 3 when Juliet let her know that Mrs. Masterson was here and waiting in room 6. That's fine, Juliet. I'm just on my way to see my last emergency. Hopefully, this won't take too long. As she went, she reflected that these emergency cases had been happening a lot lately. Some of them, like Angela Frosty, were like those cars you just knew were going to break down eventually, but you keep fixing them so you can get a few more miles out of them. Others, however, were a little more unforeseen. Many of them were old-timers, people who had been in Kashmir for years, and the work that Pamela Winter had to do on them was something else entirely. Kashmir was a special place, a place for people to escape things that were too much for them, and as a twinge of frost rippled up her arm, she stopped to contemplate who this last emergency might be. The closer she got, though, the less she found that she wanted to find out. She suddenly felt like there was something in there that she didn't want to see, and she started to turn around and go see what vexed Mrs. Masterson. She had taken a few steps away before shaking her head and heading back for exam room 6. She'd get through this. She would see this patient and be on her way. She would finish for the day and go have dinner with her girlfriend. She would go to bed on time. She would wake up and she would do it all again tomorrow. When she opened the door, however, she felt thick tendrils of dread push through her as she saw the man laying across her couch. He was a simple enough fellow, someone she wouldn't look twice at in a crowd, but looking at him always filled Pamela with a sense of existential dread. It reminded her of a memory she had in her cupboard, a memory of someone as they watched their father die. As they had held his shrunken hand, watching the rise and fall of his chest, they had wondered if they would cease to exist when their father died. Were they real? Were they nothing but a fever dream that this old man was having before the final gasp? Would they cease to exist when he did? Dr. Winter had no father, none that she would speak of, but when she spoke to this man, she felt just that way. She felt as if she might unmake herself by saying the wrong thing. She felt afraid in a way that she had not since time was a squalling infant. I don't know why I'm here, Pamela. You're here for therapy, right? She said, taking a seat before the couch. I mean here. Why am I here in Kashmir? He ran his hand over his luxurious dark hair, staring at the ceiling as he tried to puzzle out something Pamela couldn't understand. I've been here for longer than I should have been, haven't I? Have you? Pamela asked, really not sure at all. How long had he been here? He'd been here before her. He'd been her first patient, in fact, but she did not know how long he had lived in Kashmir. She couldn't even be sure that he did live in Kashmir. She'd never seen his address. She had never seen a check that had been made out from his bank. Winter had never been paid by this man, but she continued to see him regardless. When he came to her office, she had to see him. Those were the rules. He sighed, smiling as he looked at her. Sometimes therapy feels more like talking to myself, but I always enjoy our little conversations, Dr. Winter. I know I should leave. I know things are waiting for me out there. But when I stand at the edge of town and look at what lies beyond, I can't bring myself to go. I wonder sometimes if the town would even go on if I left. Dr. Winter wondered that too. When she thought about it, she felt like doing nothing so much as shaking into pieces. "You're right," he said, getting up and smiling at her. "That's why I come here, after all. Thanks, Doc. You know just what to say. I'll see you at the big fall bash, and tell Charlie not to worry. I'm sure it will be enough to fill even his blue, blue heart with joy." Juliet found her in the room a few minutes later. She said it had been nearly half an hour, and Pamela realized she had patients waiting for her. She couldn't even really remember what she had been doing in here. Was I seeing a patient?" she asked Juliet. "I don't know, Doc. You came in here after you talked with Mrs. Frosty. I don't know. You just had the 2 emergencies. I'm not sure what you were in here doing. Maybe just taking a minute to get your thoughts." Dr. Winter got up and shook off the trepidation that had been building after whatever it was that had just happened. No rest for the wicked, after all. "You're still here. I thought you might be. Thanks for joining me for tonight's story. If your insatiable appetite for horror knows no bounds, might I suggest one of our playlists, or one of our previous stories in the archive? There should be one appearing at the end of the story any minute now. And of course, if you're not subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Maybe hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the spooky things that we do here. If you prefer your horror a little more analog, you can always pick up one of my books. There's a link below to my latest, and it'll take you to all the great things that I've posted on Amazon. For my book lovers in the audience, I always suggest coming on down to Patreon so you can become part of my ghostly reader tier and get a book anytime I write one, which is usually about twice a year. Speaking of my patrons, let's go ahead and thank them, shall we? Thanks to Unicorn Hollow for being our spooky ghost contributor. Thanks to Janet and Lady Vengeance for being our spooky skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Emily Coltsfoot, Stephanie Carrington, Marianne Schuler, Tyler Parker, and Jennifer Damron for being our ghostly reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion, come on down to Patreon. I have many tiers. I'm sure you'll find one that suits you best. I always recommend the Ghostly Reader tier, since you get a signed book anytime I write one on your doorstep. But I have many tiers, and again, I'm sure you'll find one to suit you. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.